spend the next couple minutes talking to you about happiness. Now, happiness is something that we talk about on the daily, and it's thrown around with the expectation that we are A, supposed to know what it means, B, supposed to know how to obtain it, and C, supposed to know how to be it. Well, you may be asking yourself, what the heck does a 16-year-old know about happiness? I like to consider myself a child of two worlds, and that has allowed me to have this unique perspective on happiness. One world being the area of Washington, D.C., here where we are surrounded by great wealth and great luxury, and the other being the Philippines, where, like here, there is great wealth and there are great people, but unfortunately for the majority of the population, they do face extreme poverty, and there's a great lack for what we here take for granted. Now, I am half Filipino, so I've spent many of my summers growing up there and getting to explore the country and meet new people. And from spending so much time between two such different places, I've found that because of the comfort provided by our society, there's a much greater opportunity to find discontent and unhappiness and meaningless things instead of actively trying to pursue happiness. Why is it that depression, anxiety, these daily stresses, why are they so prevalent in a society that is supposed to be rich and comfortable? Now that brings me to my mystery of the universe. Why is it that people who have experienced the most pain and have the most challenges to overcome find a way to be happy, while others who on the surface have so many blessings still are unhappy? I want to start in Manila, the capital city of the Philippines, where just imagine the humidity and the constant 80-degree air and the blaring of car horns and the smell of leaking gas. Here, there's bumper-to-bumper traffic 24/7, turning a 15-minute ride into a 3-hour one. Now, despite what you might think, the Filipinos do not let something so menial get to them. They are a naturally happy race. There was actually a study done on Asian cultures, and despite the Philippines being one of the poorest countries, it was found to be one of the happiest races. Now, how is it possible that despite all the problems they have to overcome, such as rebuilding from natural disasters, tackling the lack of resources and transportation, that they still find a way to be happy? Now, I hope to answer these questions through a series of 4 observations on happiness. The first being that happiness is not something that just happens to you. Take sports, for example. It makes sense that when good things happen to you, you would be happy, and that when bad things happen to you, you'd be sad, right? But as many of you know, that just often isn't the case. Now, like I said before, let's look at sports. Not to say that all athletes are unhappy, but why is it that when an athlete signs a $20 million contract, they still find a reason to get mad when someone else signs an even greater one? Whereas on the other hand, you have a child who has nothing, and when given something as simple as a teddy bear, has enough happiness in that moment to last them an entire lifetime. When my family goes to the Philippines, we spend weeks preparing boxes full of used toys and used clothes so that when we get there, we can distribute them out to whoever comes to our door. My favorite part about going to the Philippines is when it's kids who come to our door, and we get to give them, like I said before, something as simple as a teddy bear. And despite them probably having no other toys at home and probably not even a bed to go home to, they choose to interpret that situation so that they can find the most happiness. And from this, I've learned that we may not control what life we're born into, but we do get to control what life we lead based on how we think. I want you all to think of happiness as the plant of your soul. What you let grow, what you feed will grow, and what you starve will wither. In order to be happy and to find happiness in the world, we must start interpreting the things that happen to us in a good way and not a bad way. Because negativity and these other stresses can only continue unless you allow them to. Now I want to bring your attention to the happiness formula. Now, this formula was explored by Sonia Louis-Brzezinski in her book, The How of Happiness. And she basically says that happiness is based on 50% biology, which you obviously can't control, 40% interpretation, and only 10% what actually happens to you. So based on that 40%, now that's a pretty large number, you can really control whether you're happy or not. You get to decide whether you want to be happy or whether you don't. And by interpreting the things that happen to us in a brighter and happier way, you're feeding that inner happiness, and it will only continue to grow. My second observation is that happiness means different things to different people. Now, when we go to the Philippines, most of our time is spent in Albuera, which is a fishing village out in one of the provinces. And here, life focuses on much simpler things. It focuses on the local church, on the bustling fish market, or even on the one communal structure where you'll always find a game of cross-generational basketball, and there are always kids cheering on, and you never know who you'll meet. When I'm here, when I'm in Albuera, I find it so interesting because I get to meet all these different people. And oftentimes I'll find myself in an hour-long conversation with an adult who's telling me stories about the good old days of my grandma when she was in charge. And in that moment, they're able to find joy in giving me something from these stories that I would never, no matter how much money I have, would have been able to buy. Now, I want you all to think about this picture for a second. You probably see the smile on these kids, the smiles on these kids' faces, yet, as you can see, they obviously don't have much based on the structure. These kids find joy in what they can in any opportunity they have. Now, a funny story that I always like to share is that my dad, here, he's a normal looking guy. He's 6'4", pale skin, dark eyes, dark hair. But there, he's basically a whole different species. And the kids love being able to explore something new, or in this case, someone new, and they find joy in being able to do that. And when my dad goes out for runs, you'll often just see these kids trailing him, laughing and smiling. And like I said before, life is simple, so they have to find joy in what they can. Happiness means different things to different people, and there was a study done on what happiness meant at the core for different races. And as you might assume, for American society, even Canadian society, at the core was wealth and career. But as you travel to Europe and Asia, at the core of these societies were things that were more meaningful, such as self-love, social interaction, respect, family. Basically, the whole point being is that there are very different ways to think. And the author, David Brooks, summarizes these very different ways of thinking in two ways, basically saying there are two ways to think. One, being the resume life, in that we go through our life building up to the day when we can be happy, presumably the day of your retirement. The second being the eulogy life, in that you go through every day practicing this conscious happiness so that you can look back at the end of your life and admire the love, generosity, and virtue of its entirety and not just the span of 20 years. Unfortunately, I think our society heavily focuses on the resume life, in which we go through every day trying to build up our careers and achieve things, but at the end of the day, you won't remember the days when you got the latest iPhone or that you got a raise. It's the days where you acted with love and interacted with other humans that you'll remember. I encourage you all to determine what happiness truly will mean to you so that you can start to pursue it. Now, as you think about happiness, also consider what you value spiritually and mentally and materially. And it brings me to my third point. Happiness and virtue go hand in hand. Instead of finding joy in what we do have, we find discontent in what we don't. And it ties back to the idea, well, which beast are you actually feeding? You're not feeding the happiness, you're feeding the negativity. So you're only going to continue to find negativity in the world. A survey was done with a group of millionaires, and in it they were asked, well, how much more money would you need in order to be happy? And the average answer was a staggering 50%. That brings me back to the idea, well, if you value material things and such as money, it'll only leave you wanting more since it's so fleeting. I, on the other hand, have found that happiness and virtue do go hand in hand, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that your most satisfying happiness is going to come from these other things: love, generosity, kindness. And there's a great quote by Aristotle in which he says, "Happiness does not consist in pastimes and amusements, but in virtuous activities." And he goes on to say that only the virtuous person can be happy. Like I said before, your greatest happiness is going to come from these acts of virtue. And I think Stone Ridge actually does an amazing job in teaching us how to live lives with virtue because of social action. We are encouraged to go out and practice this love for other humans and practice virtue, practice generosity. I'll never forget the day I actually went to Ashburton Elementary right here in Rockville, and I spent hours playing with kids of all different backgrounds and ages, and they had these smiles on their faces that I'll never forget. I remember coming home that night and I was so filled with happiness, and I didn't have to travel an ocean away to practice virtue and to practice love for other human beings. And it just proves how lasting the happiness that comes from virtuous acts is, because here I am almost 2 years later talking to you all about it. Now, as you discover what happiness means to you, also remember that there's a great difference between obtaining happiness and actually practicing it. And it brings me to my fourth and final observation on happiness, in that happiness means living a conscious life every day. Now, for those of you who don't know, there was a great author by the name David Foster Wallace, and he gave a commencement speech titled "This is Water." And in it, he focused not on the normal criteria of commencement speech, but instead on the absentness of the human mind and the power of consciousness. He started with a story about fish. And in it, there are two fish who are swimming along, and the third fish comes along and says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" The first fish turns to the second and says, "Well, what the heck is water?" The point that Mr. Foster Wallace was trying to make was that we often go through life blatantly unaware of the normal things, the normal yet important things. You never know what happiness you'll find in what you consider normal. It's so easy to zone out and just constantly try to get to the weekend, which I know I'm definitely guilty of. But by zoning out and in this constant pursuit to get to the weekend, you miss out on 5 full days in which, if you had just been a little bit more conscious, maybe you could have been a little bit more happy. And that's what Mr. Foster Wallace is trying to say here, in that the key is how to keep from going through your comfortable, prosperous, respectable adult life dead, unconscious, a slave to your head and to your natural default setting. We have to try and avoid going blind to our natural default setting, as Mr. Foster Wallace says, and to avoid falling prey to it. And to do this, we have to start questioning the assumptions that we make about people and the world, and start being more aware of our surroundings, in the hope that this will bring us to a more lasting and fulfilling happiness. Unfortunately, for many of us, we aren't actively going through our days trying to figure out what brings us happiness. Instead, we default to finding happiness in these meaningless and fleeting things. Whereas in the Philippines, you really have no other choice but to find happiness in conscious thinking and in the things around you. And so it makes sense that they find greater and more satisfying happiness, and that they're able to tackle these problems and the pain that they have to face because they find happiness in such satisfying places. Unfortunately, Mr. Foster Wallace was not able to reach his own happiness, but he did know what it was, and he left us with the key to it, and the key to practicing it, and the key to continue feeding happiness as the plant of our soul. Ultimately, in order to be happy, we must live with a conscious mind and be fully aware of the choices we make to avoid falling prey to our natural default setting. And I think that is the perfect place to end, and that ultimately happiness requires us to live with a conscious mind and be fully aware of how we interpret the things that happen to us and how we interpret the world around us. So that's it. That is my evolving view on happiness. Hopefully, as you consider yours, this can help. Thank you.